The UTA School of Architecture presents Next, its 2021 to 22 lecture series. These lectures explore what's next from perspectives that include issues relating to the pandemic, navigation and shifts in our social culture, and transformations in response to climate change. Discussions and work represent thoughtful and creative production that challenges the discipline. Next advocates for new and progressive approaches that expand upon normative practice and underscore a commitment of scholarship and inquiry from the School of Architecture.
When we were invited for the lecture and we were given the prompt of next, we were thinking about what that meant to us. And we thought, what's next isn't always clear. And it's definitely not easy to forecast. What's next, anything that's in the future, especially for a small firm, is really hard to gauge. And so we decided to take a look back of all the projects that we've had over the past 3 years and that we have on our plate right now. And this is a little thumbnail of each one of them in chronological order. They all took really different trajectories, and each one of them in their own way caused us to constantly recalibrate and reassess our design process and the way that we were going to communicate with our clients and the people that we work with on a daily basis. And so for this lecture, we decided that we would pare this down to 5 projects. They're all pretty unique. A couple of them are built. I guess actually 3 of them are built. One's completely, a couple are in process. One got put on hold indefinitely. And so we just wanted to talk about that kind of ebb and flow in the process and how each one is different. And so the first one that we want to talk about is the Montrose Hotel. The Montrose neighborhood is a really vibrant, energetic neighborhood in the center of Houston. It's very eclectic and has a lot of culture and energy to it. And we met these clients because Eric and I designed Goodnight Charlie's while we were both at Content Architecture. And Goodnight Charlie's is a honky tonk. And we had designed for them a modern version of a honky tonk to go on the site in Montrose. So this is Montrose. This gives you an idea of its proximity to downtown. Goodnight Charlie's is located right here. And they approached us and said, we would like to build a hotel nearby to Goodnight Charlie's so that they can kind of talk to each other and be an integral part of this area of Montrose. But this was on the site. And what they initially said to us is that they wanted to renovate this. It was a 20-unit apartment complex that was built in the 70s. It had a pool that had been filled in with dirt. And it was really run down. I took measurements out here and there were cockroaches and bugs everywhere. So it was a pretty daunting thing to think about in terms of how to renovate it to get the goals that they were imagining. But there were a few things that we were really concerned about as we went through the design process with them. One is that we would be changing the use from an apartment complex to a hotel. And that meant that we would have to introduce an elevator. We would be required to have additional parking, which was not already on the site. So it would probably have to be off-site. It would require there to be additional egress and fire considerations that we would need to take into account. We were also really concerned about this compressed floor assembly that this initial structure had. So the ceilings were at 8 feet. There were window units. And so for us to reintroduce an HVAC system into this would have compressed that ceiling even more. And we just, as we worked through the design process and came up with ideas for this, we became more and more concerned that we weren't going to be able to achieve the spatial and experiential qualities that they were really looking for in a hotel. And so we took a big risk. This was one of our first projects, and we decided we were going to show up to a meeting and tell them that they should consider building a ground up project. And we went in, it was like a pact that we knew that there was a chance we were going to walk out without a project at all, like that they might just end our relationship with them right then. But they didn't. And so they gave us a challenge, and the lot is 100 by 100 feet. And they challenged us within a week. They gave us 1 week to do this. They said, we want you to create a hotel that has the maximum number of rooms. It needs to include a small bar, an area for a private outdoor lounge. And on this 100 by 100 foot postage stamp, all the required parking needed to be on site. And so we just got to work really quickly and came up with a pretty exciting scheme that luckily they were okay with, and we saved the project ourselves.
So the big departure point here was that they decided that they wanted to keep all the parking on site. And in that case, it meant that we had to go with a boutique hotel that has 9 rooms. And so we distributed those 9 rooms over the top 2 floors. And then the ground floor would be a bar, and a lounge, an outdoor patio. And then we, in this very small lot, try to squeeze a little tiny portion of coveted outdoor space that would be adjacent to the bar and the lounge area, but still try to maintain some semblance of privacy from the street and from the parking. So what you see here is the ground floor and the bar and the lounge, the lobby near the front, and then the direct connection that we have between the bar and the lounge, and then the outdoor patio area, which would have a water feature and really is intended to act more like an oasis. And then you also see the separation between that zone and a masonry wall that divides the parking lot, as well as a wall that divides it from the street. So this is getting to the kind of rendering of what that would look like on the site. You see the separation of the parking, and then in this case, we're trying to give a lot of privacy to the units while still maintaining a friendly appearance towards the street. And so in order to do that, we tried to implement a lot of texture along that facade, even though it was a fairly sparse facade. And so we did that through a brick screen that is a focal point at the stairwell, and then also a green wall, and then a roof deck that covers the parking. And so this is the sectional condition that you end up seeing, which is really largely about creating these internal views, either into the courtyard or when you're looking over the courtyard, having a green roof to look at above the parking as opposed to just a straight forward parking deck. And then this is getting back to that idea of the screen and the brick facade and trying to get playful with that from the street. We did a number of studies, just experimenting with different ways in which we could develop the masonry. This is the one that was settled on, and the idea being that it acts as a lantern and kind of its own signage element at night, and kind of brightening up that facade. Just kind of a quick view of the interior. Again, trying to make that an oasis and carve out a little tiny piece of outdoor gathering space on a very tight site. But before we could really get anywhere with all of this, there was one big hiccup we had to get past, which is that this is in a residential area in which there are no hotels. And there's a very distinct reason for that. It's because the city of Houston has restrictions on hotels that are under 75 rooms and the requirements for those being placed in a residential neighborhood. And even though this to many wouldn't seem like a residential neighborhood, because of the fact that it's part of a linear corridor of urbanism in a very commercial district, very walkable neighborhood, everything behind it, everything behind that highlighted section there is all residential neighborhood. So what that meant is that the city wasn't going to naturally just approve this project. So
yeah, I think what's really interesting too is this is we kind of pride ourselves in Houston for having no zoning. And we managed for our first project to find the one area where there was a zoning restriction that wouldn't allow us to build what we wanted to. So we had to go for the variance, but luckily we got it.
So the next thing that we, in developing the rooms, one of the great things is that we got to work with kind of a whole collaborative team. We had a interiors that we were working with, as well as a branding department, graphic design, and that all went into kind of determining and influencing the look of the interior of these rooms.
So unfortunately, it started out right before the pandemic that the project went on hold, and then the pandemic kind of sealed the fate for an indefinite amount of time. I think there's a chance that it might come back. If it comes back, it'll probably be in a different iteration. But for now, this one didn't. We got all the way to the point we were about to submit for a permit, and the project got put on hold. So
Projects have a lot of stories to them, and this is one that we'll see. The story is to be continued.
yeah.
So this is the project that was our first food bill project, and it was for clients in Austin that wanted a project that felt very modest and in some ways private from the street, but one that was full of surprises and light when you walk and move through it. And to add to that, it had a established large pecan tree in the middle of the lot. And if you know anything about Austin, they care a lot about the trees, and they're very strict about what you can do on lots that have established trees. And so very quickly that became the governing and in many ways the pivot point for the structure. And it became the main courtyard in which the home wraps around. But then in addition to that, we created a series of additional courtyards, again, trying to get this idea of a house that unfolds as you move through it. So that it's not just about one moment in relation to a courtyard, but it's a series of moments that unfold as you move through. This is that looking through the carport to that first kind of tiny courtyard that's off of the dining room that we'll see in a bit. Entry sequence, you're coming in a more formal entry, you'll see the masonry wrapping through, and then on the right, the idea of these clerestory window conditions that go against it. The owner was very much drawn to this idea of a mid-century modern language, but we tried to kind of push the usual horizontal datum that you see in those kind of projects. And even though it has that from the street and even from the courtyard, there are these moments where there's a lot of verticality and play within the ceiling plane. And that happens here in the study, that happens in the living room where you see it vaulting up to a clerestory condition, that happens again in the dining room. And what that begins to do is create a series of spaces that are informed by these ceiling conditions. And as you move through the space, even though it feels very horizontal, the sectional condition is very diverse. Looking down the hallway and again to the main courtyard on the right. And one of the things that we get to be a part of in a lot of these residential projects is helping define the narrative of the home for the clients and getting to design custom components to help define that narrative. And in this case, that was a series of bunk beds that relate to the way in which it's going to be used by the kids who will be in that room. This is the primary bedroom looking back towards the courtyard. And then here, the primary bathroom, and the way in which light is modulated in different ways as you move through the house. And then this is really just the kind of most extreme version of that, where all the other little insets and courtyards are bright and airy, and this one is much more subdued and kind of more serene in relationship to a fairly pivotal kind of skylight moment and a redbud tree that sits below it. This is the large, kind of more expansive courtyard in relation to the pool, the window wall beyond, and the way in which it acts as a gallery. All of this project, very monolithic, of course, in terms of the masonry usage, but we try to be very accurate in the way in which we use that masonry, so everything is set up on a very tight module, and so that ideally there's no cut bricks. It's always either a half or a full brick, and then the hope is that when you look at the project, that helps contribute to a kind of a seamless and a kind of a careful nature, even though it's fairly pared down. Here you can see the idea of these rooms within rooms that are created within the outdoor courtyard.
Okay, next we want to talk about the Watonga residence, which is a client that we first started with while we were at Convent. And she came to us with this house and wanted to renovate it. It's a house that she had lived in a while, and she wanted to add an addition to it and open up some spaces. And we started to look at the neighborhood that it was in. It's in a really cool area. It's on the north side of Houston. And this right here is not a highway, that's a bayou that is running, that's White Oak Bayou that runs nearby. And you can see that there's a big open park space right here, right beside the lot. And so if any of you know anything about Houston, you know that where there's bayous, there's flooding. And so this is a map that shows in dark blue the floodway. The light blue color is the 100-year floodplain, and the green space is the 500-year floodplain. And so that being in the floodplain creates a whole new set of restrictions and guidelines that we have to abide by as we design a project. And to renovate a project, it becomes really restrictive. To renovate a project in a floodplain, if you touch more than 50% of the value of the structure, you have to raise the entire structure up to be above the base flood elevation. And if you want to do an addition, you can build on an addition, but you can only attach through a doorway. So you could never open up an entire room onto another room of the addition. And the addition would need to be at the appropriate elevation per FEMA and per local restrictions. And so what we realized is that she was in no way going to get the house that she wanted if we tried to renovate it. And so it meant that we were going to demolish the house and start new because she liked the location of the project site. And so she gave us a few parameters that were really important to her. One is she wanted, even though there was a major street running, a major spine running to the east of the project, she wanted the project to be private. She also wanted us to employ sustainable strategies. So she requested that it have a water cistern and that there is solar that is part of the house. And then probably her biggest request was that whatever we build maximized her lot, that she would be able to use the landscape more than she had with her previous house. And so what we did is worked out a way to anchor the house to the edge of the site. One of the things that was really nice about the site was this grove of trees to the north. There's a mason lodge on the lot to the north. And so the likelihood of those trees going anywhere for a while was really low. And so we oriented the house in that direction. But that also meant that we opened up the lot at its widest point. She also fosters animals. And so a big part of how we were challenged to design this project was to make sure that all of the surfaces were good for animals to be able to use and share with her.
Durable.
Yeah, durable. So this is how this is the floor plan of how this started to shake out. We created two boxes. One is the garage and utility core, and then one is the main volume of the house. And we connected it with a transparent stitching connector, so that we were trying to make sure that even though we were mostly going to close the house down to the street, that it still felt inviting to someone that was approaching the house. So you can see that stitch there creates a spine that runs through the project, which is all covered outdoor space. And that stitch is connecting those two volumes. Additionally, on the ground floor, we create in the center of it is one puncture that goes all the way to the roof and brings light in from the south side down to the core of the project, since all the windows are going to face north. So this is kind of an early sectional model that we created for the project. You can see where we have the skylight to the south that drops down towards the center of the project and punctuates those public spaces. Another thing to notice is that we're trying to figure out ways whenever we have to raise a house high out of that flat pancake landscape, how do we transition back to the landscape in a nice way rather than just coming out of the ground in a really abrupt way. So one of the challenges that we ran into on this project is that when our client went to apply for the loan, the house appraised for higher than comps in the area. And the bank asked us to increase the square footage of the house. And so we were already in permitting. The project was moving forward. We thought it was golden. And the client came back to us and said, can we enclose this balcony? That's literally all the square footage that we need to get added back to the house, and the bank will approve the loan. And so we did that. And so we turned it into an exercise room on the second floor here. Originally, we had planned for there to be an exercise space more centralized, but now it's become a closed area. And in the end, it was a situation that we kind of weren't happy about when the request was made, but in the end, I think it worked out for the best. And so this is how the form took shape once we enclosed that balcony area that we had planned for. You can see it's a really simple form. One simple gable that runs the length of a 2-story volume that contains all the main spaces, and then a utility core that's clad in full stone veneer. A very simple material palette is being described. It's common for us to have projects that don't have huge budgets. And so what we did on this project is use a hardy trim material as a rain screen. So it meant it was a little thicker than usual and a thinner profile, and we didn't lap it. And so it created a look that was unusual for a really affordable material. Oops, sorry. Keep going a little too fast there. So this is the front of the house where you start to see that it has that transparent spine that's running through the middle. You can see straight through the house, but you can't see into the main living spaces. The space that's above the entry is her office. And that's that spine again, looking from each direction. And here you see, so this one it just finished construction. We don't have all the photos yet of it. But here you can see the light well that's functioning from above, and how the view on that ground floor plane turns to a horizontal capture of the landscape, and then that gradual transition back down from the raised plinth. This is the main ground floor space where the kitchen and dining room and living are all fully open. And then upstairs, this is her office space that has a view that frames the park across the street. It also has plenty of built-in shelves for all of her record collection and a niche for a record player to go. So it was a fun part of the project where we got to design something specific to the client's needs. I think that's a common thread through a lot of our projects, that we try to do a few areas that have something custom within it, and that we're really careful on how we detail it, but it only happens in a small area that could have a big impact. So the bathroom, the master bathroom is pretty simple, but we created this teak shelf system that divides the bath from the shower area and just creates an element that feels really custom for the level of house this is. Additionally, we designed a custom stair handrail. We found that that's a pretty easy way to make a big impact within a project. And then we worked a lot with texture and bringing in a lot of different materials into the project. So you see that on the right. And then this is a view looking towards the trees to the north. So this is the adjacent lot and the trees that we hope never get cut down.
So this is a project that is a bit of a departure in terms of language and a lot of what you'll see of our work, but is very much informed by the fact that this is a historic home. It's a home that was built in 1910. Former governor lived there, Ross Sterling. You see it here on the Sanborn maps, the kind of original location. The home was subdivided over the years. There were a number of different effectively a number of apartments that this had been turned into. And then the developer, in their quest to make improvements to the small complex, decided that they were going to cover the whole thing in vinyl siding and then rip out all the original windows and put in vinyl windows. At which point the city said, I don't think so. And they red tagged them and put so many red tags on the project that the developer became overwhelmed about how they would get past that.
That was in 2016.
That was in 2016.
So it was abandoned for a few years.
And the owners, now owners of this project, used to walk there, lived in the neighborhood, used to walk their dog by it, and they would walk by and just say, man, that would be kind of our dream home. We'd love to have that someday. And because of a series of poor decisions by the developer, that actually became an attainable thing as it sat on the market because no one wanted to deal with it. So this is the historic Avondale district, and you'll see here that we sit just on the edge of that. And because of that, this is considered a contributing structure, which means that we really can't do much to the exterior other than restore it. And in this case, negotiate with the city to restore it to what it should have been, even though a lot of damage had been done that we couldn't do anything about. So the first step was uncovering a lot of taking off the vinyl siding to see what the state of the original 3/4 inch wood siding is, which we were able to save and keep. Also looking at the porch and the fact that it had these large wings on it that weren't part of the original structure and were contributing to the deterioration and kind of demise of the porch. That all got torn off. The whole porch got literally torn off and had to be rebuilt. But here you can say as it's nearing the kind of completion of construction, at least from the exterior, it's been cleaned up pretty well. But from the exterior, not a drastic departure, other than but in nicer proportions. But this project really, in a lot of ways, became a subtractive process, both on the exterior and on the interior. In this case, looking at the back of the house, you can see that there are a number of odd additions and kind of tacked on moments that had happened over the years. And so we thankfully, we had owners that were willing to really reduce the square footage of their home. And in this case, they were willing to modernize the back of the home a little bit. And that then has a language to a new garage apartment that we established at the rear of the home, which replaced you can see a very, very dilapidated garage that had a sill plate that was below grade that we really couldn't do much about.
Couldn't save that one.
So on the interior, which you start to see in the section, we wanted to just create a few moments where there were surprises, sectional surprises that when you walk in that you wouldn't expect in a historic home. And because of the fact that the interior had been pretty much totally destroyed, it gave us some freedom to do that. This is the original ground floor demolition plan and the renovation plan. And you'll see that the big move that we made, which relates to that last sectional drawing that you saw, is that we created a carve out in the transition between the formal and the informal spaces. In the way that with these older homes would do, we left the formal spaces at the front of the home, but then created this big moment when we transitioned between the two of them. And then we also relocated the door so that we, instead of a large formal entry sequence, we gave that space over to the dining room, creating a connection between the dining room and then the kitchen in the rear. And then also we reworked the staircase, which had picking up a large amount of real estate, and straightened it out. This is the second floor. You'll see on the left the way in which it was pretty subdivided, and that floor carries through to the second floor and becomes the organizational structure for reworking the entire second floor. The other thing to note about this is that in these old homes, there were sleeping porches off the front and the back. We move forward, you'll see that the way in which we kind of incorporated those into bedrooms. This is looking at the main entry. We repurposed the front door, actually rebuilt the front door.
To match the original.
Yeah, per historic. And then when you come in, you're directly on access with that light well, which you're about to see from the second floor vantage point, the way in which that got carved through. And then keeping a very simple kind of white interior palette, but then the owner was really on board with the idea of just introducing texture within that white palette. And so the vaulted condition becomes kind of a scallop motif, which then carries through to a screen on the first floor. Straightened out staircase. We made efforts to maintain the existing trim and try to there's something nice about the character of that, even kind of old paint that exists on it. This is the primary bedroom, which is the old sleeping porch, which you'll see has become the kind of treehouse moment of the home, and has a large oak tree with branches that sprawl and overlooks. This is from the second floor, seeing that kind of scallop texture that we created and introducing some more modern details in relation to a more traditional home. Again, with the stairwell. And then in the rear, the garage apartment, which became her photography studio and his kind of machine shop below, it was on a tight budget. And so, of course, it was all about light as a photography studio. We just made one big move, bulking everything up to a clerestory condition.
Well, this one is almost done. They should be moving in just a few weeks. So stay tuned. So we'll be able to share some more photos of that, especially since the client is a photographer. This project began in the pandemic. And so this is the last project that we'll talk about. And it's one that caused a big shift in our office and how we were going to communicate with our clients. And how we would navigate the crazy past year and a half that we've all had. And at the time when we were working on this project, I was teaching a graduate studio at Rice with Juan Ix, who is principal at Product Fora. And our students had started in person, and then partway through the semester, of course, everyone had to go home. And we had planned on them creating physical models. And when they no longer could, we asked them to develop digital models that looked like physical models. So all of these, the students did digital models. We even asked them to add things like X-Acto blades and things in there that bring scale that make it feel like it was actually a physical model. And it was a really fun exercise. And so since we were exploring that within the school, we decided to take a similar approach whenever we were going to present the first ideas to the client on this project. And we thought we were being so smart. We said, this is going to be a great idea. We're gonna present 3 concepts to them, but because it's all going to look like it's made out of basswood, they'll only focus on how it relates to the site, and they'll focus on the form of the project, and we can have a conversation about these basic initial parameters to a project.
Because we constantly have this problem in residential, which is just getting people in that first pass to look past materiality and say, sometimes people can get so hung up on one thing, but no, look at the form and look at the space, what the relationship is.
So this is the second one we presented, and then this was the third one, which ultimately they ended up choosing. But at the end of our presentation to them, there was a long, silent pause.
And then the first, I believe the first words that we heard were, they just all look so brutal. And so we kind of dropped our shoulders a little bit and regrouped and thought, okay, well, that didn't work. But it was a good try. And so then we went back to more conventional representational means of showing what the actual materiality was. And it was funny how the minute that we did that, suddenly became very accessible again. Suddenly they were on board with the same ideas, even though they were just being represented in a different way. So the project kind of took shape as a masonry structure, but then it became, and of course the roof shape was dictated by solar considerations as well as rainwater collection, and then it had an orientation to a side yard on a fairly small urban lot, relatively speaking. And then COVID hit and supply chains changed and material shortages happened, and the budget ended up taking a turn, and we had to rethink the masonry, but still introduce ideally texture. And we did that through hardy siding and through using the 3/4 inch thick material, having it be lapped on the bottom and then flush on the top, still maintaining those horizontal datum lines. That made a huge difference in the budget. Everything from steel to.
We're proud to say this one's getting built. This was taken today.
Yeah. So, yeah, stay tuned for more information.
Yeah, so this one's on its way, even though it was major hiccups. And so now that we've kind of shared with you those 5 projects, what we wanted to just talk about at the end is how we talk about the design process. And in school, we always talk about it being this linear process. This is the initial way we talk about design process. But I think we all know that it's much messier than that. And a way that sometimes people describe it is more like a spiral, where you have a goal that you're heading towards, but you start out with a lot of options and you're trying to focus the scope and densify the amount of information that you're using to project that idea. And so you're working your way around the design process and trying to get to the center. But what we've found is that it is very likely that we will have a goal, a target in mind, and we'll start our schematic design process, but all of a sudden that goal will shift. That point, that goal that we're shooting for is going to change. And it could change for so many different reasons. It could be that the client has changed their mind about something. It could be that we're faced with a global pandemic that we hadn't planned for. Who knows? There are lots of reasons for that. But when that happens, the design process and the way that it looks much messier and much different from these idyllic ideas that we have about process. And it happens because we're constantly asked to pivot based on new parameters that we receive throughout the design process. Those pivots can occur for so many different reasons, like I was saying. So a really common one I feel like we're dealing with in Houston a lot is climate change, and the fact that we are dealing with flooding. It's changing the way we think about our infrastructure. It's changing the way we think about how we design our buildings, how to make them more resilient. The pandemic, it completely changed the way we think about our daily patterns of living, how we work, how we want to live in our houses. So those are causing pivots in projects that are happening right now across the world. There are also times where you have to pivot in a project because, like Eric mentioned, there was a supply chain shift, or maybe there's a market shift. Maybe the value of the land has gone up and the client decides to sell the land rather than build on it. That's definitely happened before too. It causes a pivot within the process. Regulatory issues are also things that we've encountered that cause us to have to pivot. It could be something like in the city of Houston, they recently changed the base flood elevation for floodplains. It used to be 1 foot above the 100-year, and now it's 2 feet above the 500-year floodplain. Or it could be an HOA and a single person in a neighborhood deciding that you have to change your exterior material to your project. But we also need to remember that there are things that are much more personalized, much more local that can also cause those pivots. Somebody could find out they're pregnant. Someone in your office could find out they're pregnant, and that changes the way that you design a project. So they run the gamut from global parameters that cause this to happen to small local ones that are very close to home. And so when we look at the projects that we're currently working on, there are some patterns that are causing a shift within our office right now and the trajectory of where we're headed next. So these 3 projects are all multifamily projects. They're for the same developer, and they tasked us with creating affordable multifamily projects that are about 20 units each. But we've designed them in order to save them on design and construction costs to be more efficient. We've designed them to all utilize the same units. So the interior units are the same in these projects, but we are rearranging them based on the site that they're placed, and we're coming up with new exterior strategies, all using the same material palette so that they each kind of take on their own persona. And then these last 4 projects that we have highlighted there along the bottom are our most current projects that are currently in design, and none of them are in Houston. And we're a practice that most of our projects have always been centered in Houston. We're used to be able to drive to the job site and check on it when something's wrong. And this is changing that dynamic. And a lot of this we feel is happening because of the pandemic. And all of these clients are Houstonians that have either decided to have a second home, or they have decided that they want to live and work remotely someplace that they love and find a little more joy in Houston. And so that's why we named the title of our lecture, Pivot in Process. I think that one of the things that we've learned is that being flexible and open-minded and adaptable to these forces that come into our design process help make the project better in a lot of ways. And that we don't really consider them to be a negative challenge. It's a positive challenge. That's it. Thank you so much for having us.